guys, welcome back to the Improvement Season podcast with me, Pascal Floor. On the other end, it is Steve. And I think, Steve, you're right now in the deload, right? And I'm at the end of my Overreaching block. And how are you feeling already? Are you feeling kind of recovered, or are we both at the point where we're just like absolutely tired and trash, basically?
I think, yeah, it's interesting. I always say this. I spoke in my story about how I was feeling and how it's quite a normal response to have like lower motivation and just like everything hits you like a brick wall. I kind of use the example of if you've got like a nagging injury, when you're like active and doing stuff in the day, you don't feel it, but then you lie down in bed at night and you're like, oh, there it is. And it rears its ugly head. And I feel like the deload is like the comeuppance of all the accumulated fatigue, and it just hits you and you're like, oh, deload week, I feel like I should. I said this before, like when you go on holiday after an overreaching week and you're deloading, and the beginning of the holiday, you're a bit like, oh my gosh, this is a bit much. So, but by the time you get into where I am now, so 4 days deep, like I'm feeling pretty darn good. Went in, did legs today. Like I don't think I quite have the drive to go and do proper sessions. I'm still quite enjoying not having to worry about that and just going in and like doing some light stuff and then coming out. So that's nice. But I think, yeah, by the time the weekend hits, and certainly when I get into that first session of the next mesocycle, it will be like, oh yeah, real driving. But I've never had it. Like I've had people tell me, like some people have like talked about it on social media. I think maybe Harry's even experienced it. Harry Smith, the other coach, where a week of deloading hasn't even been sufficient for them. But certainly a week does it for me. I've never had it where I felt like I've needed more than a week.
I only had it in the last mesocycle, or after the last mesocycle, when my eyesight was acting up and all that kind of stuff. I think I just pushed it too far. That then caused me to actually have a little bit of a longer rest time before I'm starting the next mesocycle. But this time I'm actually all right. I don't think that this is going to happen. At least I'm not blind yet. So tomorrow will be the last session. Tomorrow will be the last session. Who knows what's happening there? But yeah, I don't think that I will lose my eyesight this time.
Did you make any modifications for this mesocycle versus the last one? I think you said you started with a bit more volume versus last
crazy,
time.
Right? Counterintuitive, what most people would have expected after losing the eyesight at the end of the mesocycle. But I think that adaptive resistance is adding up or increasing so quickly that you should be fine after a week of a proper deload when you're bringing down those fatigue levels significantly. Done that. Here I am, survived another overreaching week, which was, once again, it's like you said, I mean, the overreaching week is never fun in a gaining phase, and it is always like a little bit daunting. And funny enough, because I brought it up to one of my athletes here today as well, because he, in response to a check-in that we had, he basically said like, okay, I have 2 more sessions to go, and I'm fucking fried. And I don't know whether I can make the 2 last sessions. And I said like, you can do this. You can. Because the overreaching week isn't meant and supposed to feel like a breeze or easy or so. And especially the last 2 sessions, go in there and give it your all. Even if you then have the perception of you going in feeling a little bit under recovered, as long as you can match your last week's performance, you're kind of still progressing because the fatigue levels are higher than in the previous week. And then basically you've progressed because the fatigue is higher. So you're starting off from a bigger baseline. Right? If it's going down like significantly in the first of the 2 last sessions, I mean, these 2 sessions won't probably build you, but at the same time, if you don't do anything that is super irresponsible, I think that you can push through it, and then you have the well-deserved deload in front of you. I always say like, okay, there's light at the end of the tunnel. Go towards the tunnel, but push through it.
Yeah, I've had it with clients where you're probably the same. I kind of have a pre-planned deload, but auto-regulate whether or not we take it that week or maybe even a week earlier. So sometimes mesocycles, I tend to find either 4 to 6 weeks for most people. They tend to be, because most people we're coaching are intermediate to advanced, very dedicated, not missing sessions, training 4 to 6 times a week. So it's just there's kind of a strong average there. And sometimes we'll have it where it's like, we don't know unless we try. If you feel pretty confident, you can have a good productive week of training, at least match and actually beat performance in a few instances. Like, why not we try it? And if we get into it and it's shit's hitting the fan. Like you've got good technique, you've got like, you're not an idiot, you're not training through like minus RAR. So yeah, just call it there and we can deload. But
and
if we don't know, we don't try.
Yeah, absolutely. And the only time that I'm kind of cutting a week is basically when you are feeling that it's getting into a risky territory when it comes to feeling, I don't know, not ready. Sometimes we just feel like a body part is not ready to being pushed then, right? And then, especially in that instance, we decided to add another week for the mesocycle. But we are uncertain whether we can survive the week. But we feel like, we have some sessions more in us, but don't know if it's enough for an entire week. Then you just go in there. Let's say that is week number 5. Then you go in there and you do as many sessions as you can. Perhaps you're able to push through the entire week. Perhaps you're only able to do like 2 more sessions or so. But still, you pushed it, right? And this is the time where I'm then a little bit more flexible of like, okay, we ticked off the boxes of the things that we definitely did want to do here in this mesocycle. Now we are adding another week. And here we can be more flexible. We take it as it comes and see, okay, do you have more sessions in you, or do you have just like 1 or 2 more in you? And then you really push the envelope, properly overreached, and then you take the deload as it comes.
Yeah, I think it's, what was I going to say? Man, my brain just went to mush.
I'm the one who's overreaching at the moment, not you.
I know. I had something in my mind and I was just listening to you. I was like, yeah, I remember what I was meant to say. And then it went. You'd think I'd be skilled at that by now, as like the amount of people I've interviewed. But no, I have so many thoughts that pass through my mind, and then like all the good ones just drain out, I think. And then I come to this. Yeah, this is what I was going to, well, I think this is what I wanted to say, or something along these lines. But just so people are aware, because they might be listening like, oh, do we really have to overreach? Do we have to push it to that limit and like find our limit? Like we don't necessarily, but when you're more advanced, then we kind of phrase that as we work with mostly intermediate to advanced people, there's probably no harm in trying, and there's mixed literature to overreaching. So it's kind of like, if you know you're deloading, what's the harm in going there, so long as obviously you have the good technique and like you're taking care of yourself, you're not being reckless. So yeah, I think it's cool that we can sometimes push our clients further than they think they can even go, which is always nice. That's
the thing. I think that's the best argument you can make for it. As long as you are still moving inside the boundaries of safety, right? You're not overdoing it. You're not risking more than necessary. Then why not go there? And this is basically also then with the volume landmarks, right? When you are then feeling ready for the next session, like completely recovered, or on that specific day, you've done the sets that you actually have written out. And on that same day, you feel like, okay, I could actually repeat the same workout here now once again. I think that there's no valid reason not to actually increase the sets or the intensity or so. That is just my opinion.
You've got the technique and intensity all there.
So the prerequisites should be of course in check, right?
Yeah. I was going to say, quite often when I push my clients to that point, and I really emphasize on like, make sure your nutrition timings on check, make sure you like the details, make sure your sleep's really on check, take some time to relax, and they end up like basically just nailing their shit, and they're like, I don't know how I did it, but I managed to kind of get everything in check and had a great week. And sometimes, people just need that push up the arse. It's like, well, if you had that every week, then imagine what you'd get.
But sometimes, I mean, for some people, it's then just getting too stressful. And I had people who dropped out of coaching because they said that training and nutrition is taking over their lives. We've talked about it in the past. No one is forcing you to do that. No one is forcing you to train like 6 times, 2 times daily or so. This is entirely your decision. And you are in control of whether it takes over your life or not. Right? So I find it more of an excuse, to be honest, right? If someone feels that way, because once again, there's no necessity in actually doing that amount if you feel like that you need to sacrifice other things in life. There's always a healthy balance that you can have and still make progress. We know that. We've seen that with so many people out there. Just take someone like Jeff Albert, for example, who's training like 4-5 times out of the week, relatively low volume. He's a family man as well. He's a coach himself, right? I mean, And there are hundreds of other people out there who can manage that as well. And when this is taking over your life, I mean, this is, for me, just like a poor excuse for you in order to then cope out.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I think, especially for us, we obviously developed the relationship with the client so that they feel open to say it. I could only see that as a not valid excuse, but I could see that happening when you have like just an email template from your coach and it's like, do this. And then you're just like, I can't do it. And the coach never gets back to you because they're an email coach or just a poor coach. I'm not saying emails are inherently terrible because I know someone like Andy Morgan can rock a good email. So I don't want to discredit him by any means because I know he's great. I don't know where I was going. I think, how is this overreaching week been versus the last one then? How is anything differed apart from the eyesight's intact?
Just feeling so much better, actually. And this is also then bringing me back to the point that I brought up like earlier of adaptive resistance building up so quickly, because I'm doing basically the same amount that I've done in the last mesocycle in week number 5. And this time I'm just feeling all right. I mean, I was even considering adding another week, but I know that it wouldn't be a good idea based on the experience of my last mesocycle. I felt good in the last week, right? In the planned last week, then I added another one, and then everything went basically not to shit because my performance was still good, but my physiological response wasn't the greatest, right? With other things, such as the nervous system and stuff. And that's why I decided not to go there this time, because I know how high my volume is at the moment. And also, just like from a psychological perspective, what we've also discussed the last time, it's getting to a point where it's just not fun anymore going into the gym then in the last week. Because, you know, like today, I was doing 7 sets of leg press. It's just press. Like, yeah. And it's just, it's kind of a never-ending story. It's what is it called again? Groundhog Day with Bill Murray, right? Always the same song in the morning, and it's just like, oh, when does this stop? What do I have to do in order to make the sets end here? And yeah, I mean, overall, I felt though a little bit fresher going into the last week, and that of course was helping me in just going through the exercises. But I also can feel here today, especially because I went to Leipzig here like yesterday evening together with kids, because Katie was visiting her friends and I actually then decided to take care of the kids. First, initially we thought that I actually stay at home with the kids, but then I said like, okay, Tony is not yet at a point where he would understand that you're just not there in the middle of the night. So I'd rather come with you, book a hotel room there. You will join in the middle of the night then, right? And everything is fine and dandy, and I just take care of the kids. But I went up here in the morning, of course, with a little bit of a more sacrificed quality of sleep here in the night. Went to my second lower body session, first session of the day, SLDLs, leg curls. And I already could tell, like, okay, fatigue is a little bit higher due to the lack of quality of sleep. And do you have it the same with that when you are especially in the overreaching week, but just in general as well, when sleep hasn't been as good? I'm most of the time, probably due to the nervous system, not as capable of getting a proper mind-muscle connection as I would when I'm properly recovered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get that, and it's because I can even remember my last. It was actually the week before Overreaching. It was a not less good. I don't know how to describe it, but I was doing straight leg deadlifts, and I was just like, I know my technique's good, but I'm just like, I can't feel the connection through the hamstring like I normally can. It just feels really like, I don't know, it almost feels a bit dangerous because it's like, I'm lifting this, but I don't know what's lifting this right now.
And that's what I had here in the morning as well. First set, I could definitely feel it in the glutes and the hamstrings, but it was not the typical sensation I was getting in a normal setup and environment. Also, it was a different gym, right? I was using a different bar, which also then had I picked the wrong bar, which then had the nerding around the legs, actually. And whenever I went up and lowered the bar, I was just like scratching along my legs, and that was also a little bit distracting as well. But things like these, of course, play a role in that. But I was simply not ready. Like, and you can tell that And this is something that many people also talk about. When the fatigue is higher, then the nervous system isn't as prepared. The peripheral nervous system is impacted by that, and you're not as good in recruiting the motor units and all that kind of stuff. And you can tell by something like when you simply feel weak overall due to fatigue. This is slightly how I felt here in the morning, which made the session not as productive. But it is what it is. I still wanted to get it done and, have one more session to go. And then, rewrite the cards for the next mesocycle, which will then be a metabolite block.
It's actually made me realize it wasn't sleep that led to that session feeling that way. I was distracted slightly because I had the guy that lives in my block trained with me that day.
Oh, yeah.
And whatever it is, and I think this is just says to your level of advancement. If these small things, like literally I just had someone with me, which just put me off a little bit, I think, and like you just trained at a different gym and maybe didn't have quite good sleep, they're advanced concerns. If you can, a lot of people probably, that wouldn't even deter them one bit, it would not change anything. But when you're advanced, it's like every little detail could make a little impact and could take you away from your progress. That's why the smaller details just matter so much.
Yeah, it's funny because you now bring up a good point, which I was thinking of while I was at the gym. I was just like, okay, these things shouldn't impact me too much, but just even being at a different gym that I'm not used to gives me a sensation that I'm not in my typical environment and in my typical habitat where I'm feeling strong. Yeah. I know what kind of bar to pick. I know what kind of weight to pick. I know how the warm-up session or warm-up sets will feel, and I know how the first set will feel. All that kind of stuff, right? And I know how I will feel in general. All the preparation that goes into the session. Getting up in the morning, having my coffee, going out on a walk, then coming back, having my whey shake. Like, this is all kind of a ritual for me. And if that is not in check, and I think that this is also what many very professional athletes are doing before a huge competition, or I don't know, boxers, for example, before a huge fight. So many people are having their rituals, or like singers, like huge stars. You heard like crazy stories where they had like, okay, it needs to be this and that way. Otherwise, I'm not getting on stage. And this is, I think, that where the mindset also then comes into play. When something is just slightly off, I don't know, maybe your nervous system is impacted by that because you are more in an alert state instead of that parasympathetic state, perhaps. I don't know. Yeah,
I'm only thinking of the research on sleeping and how the brain somehow knows that you're not in your usual habitat, and so it's on edge because it's like, well, we know your home's safe, we don't know this hotel's safe. I wonder if it's similar in that it's like you're in a different place. The mind is powerful. It's crazy actually to think that it has such a controlling impact in that way.
That's true. Yeah, but overall, how's your plan now moving forward for the next mesocycle?
So I think maybe I described this last time, but it will be, I actually already drafted it last time because I wasn't sure if I was going to do 3 or 4 mesocycles worth of massing before a mini cut, but I decided on 4. So I'm going to basically do very, very similar, but introduce some higher repetition ranges, metabolite work. You kind of described how you'll be layering, well, I call it layering on. I just don't know why. I just like the idea of layering on some metabolite work to the end of the session, basically, which I will do. And similar to you, I do it for some muscle groups and not others. Just some muscle groups it works quite well for. Other ones it just kind of doesn't really feel right for. So yeah, I'll definitely be doing it for like quads, chest, some tricep. Those sort of muscle groups really respond well. So I think my structure will stay the same. I considered going to an upper lower, but I don't enjoy it that greatly. And also I don't think my volume demands are high enough to require that. I also don't really like changing my frequency too much, especially for big muscle groups within a single macro cycle of like a certain goal. I kind of like, I don't know, I feel like I'd want to start a macro cycle with that and then go, but that's just me. Like, it's logical. The more volume you need, more training sessions, higher frequency. So if I needed a certain amount of volume, maybe I could move to that high, but I don't think I need it right now. So it would just be layering on a bit of metabolite work, and I'll rotate out probably my my back squat. Okay. That might be the only rotation I make, and I'm just going to put in Actually, I'm putting in, I think, because I tried it today.
Rotate out.
So yeah, remove the back squat.
Okay.
Just because I've had it in there for a while.
I thought that last time you said that you were going to reintroduce it because you didn't do it here this mesocycle. But no,
so I
did get it wrong the last time then.
But I think I'll put in leg press, and I don't know if you have access to the same leg press variants I do. The two matrix ones. One's the one you're lying 45 degrees and it's plate loaded, and the other one's like a pin loaded one, and you're like horizontal to it, sitting down in it.
Yeah, and you're like pressing yourself
the pad away.
Yeah,
the pad away, not yourself.
No, I only have like the plate loader one.
And I know the one you mean. Pushing yourself away.
Yeah, and then the other one is where you're kind of squeezing yourself in. If you want to have a great range of motion, squeezing your way in, and then you push yourself basically backwards.
So we have one, it's similar, you have to squeeze yourself in, but you push the like foot plate away. Yeah. That's the one I think I'm going to use, just because the Matrix, I think the Matrix one at my gym might be different to yours, because I actually even looked at a video of you performing leg press on your Matrix leg press, and I was like, I can't get into that position on mine. Like, I have to put 2 fucking bumpers behind my back to get any sort of range of motion. That's incredibly uncomfortable. And
maybe it's a slightly different variation. Maybe it's a newer form or newer version or so. Yeah. But I have to say, and I don't know how you feel about it, Matrix is one of the worst machine manufacturers there are.
That's like, a common thread. I haven't experienced enough to know better, really.
I can't even fathom how they are able to sell that many machines to different gyms.
Fast, efficient fat loss. Does that sound like music to your ears? The mini cut movement might just be for you. Mini cuts are like robbing the fat bank. You want to get in and out with as much fat as possible. In a short period of time, you could easily look to lose 6 to 12 pounds of fat. The mini cut movement is excellent. There's group support for extra accountability and also expert help within the group. We have educational videos to keep you on track along the way, and you get all your nutrition and training customized and individualized for you. So if that sounds of interest, get involved with the mini cut movement.
Some of them
they must be very good at selling. They must have like the salesman on the top of everything.
I feel like they're just cheap.
Actually, or maybe this, yeah. They have a discounter when it comes to gym machines.
Some of them are fine, like they're just basically carbon copies of others, or like a Smith machine. I mean, you can't go too wrong with a Smith machine. I mean, you probably can, but as long as you can get the range of motion. And then their hack squat's good. You just have to add bumpers to the foot platform, but that's actually fine. That doesn't really cause too many issues. But I am not the best person to ask because I have such a limited experience with gym equipment. Yeah. I'd be really interested to hear what other people
like
would
the
say.
Gym 80s, and also I have access to the hammer strength, or some of the hammer strength things. And Gym 80 is actually doing very much decent stuff most of the time. Of course, they have like equipment that is just like, what did you even do here? What did you think? I mean, the thing that we talked about last time, like the engineer who was just like, I don't know, never lifted a weight or so, or like that typical guy who's just like doing partial range of motion and thus thinks like, okay, this machine has to do this and that. In reality, it's just like the worst machine there is. But yeah, in general, they have actually quite decent machines, whereas Matrix is like, the majority of machines is, especially from in the department of range of motion, they are quite often limited and, to say the least, shitty.
Yeah, it's weird because they're so similar. They're so similar to others. Like all machines, like a leg press, right? But there are small little things that just make it that little bit better. Yeah. Maybe it will happen next year. Hopefully, it will go to Vienna and actually do that, because we had that plan to go to Das Gym this year, but obviously Corona was right smack bang at its height at that time. We were planning to go, so maybe it will happen next year, because I'd love to try a load of different ones, and like maybe it will completely blow my mind, and I'm like, yeah, I will travel 2 hours to this gym every day, and I don't know, sacrifice I don't know what that would take a lot of time out of my day, to be honest. So yeah, I mean, I think it's probably complaining on a high level with some of it, but at the same time, small things can make a big difference, as we said, for someone advanced. I can see that. I can.
Yeah. Absolutely. Should we go to questions?
Yeah, why not?
Cool. Then I have no idea, because we are always, of course, one week Steve is reading the questions out loudly, and now it's my turn, and Steve is always jumping around in the questions, so I don't know where he started and left off the last time. So I will just like go with Colin Moreau, the first one, and see whether we've actually answered that question or not. So, how much quad activation am I missing by having too much of a flare toe angle when squatting or doing leg presses? I've been experimenting with this lately. I definitely have to be much more conscious to force my ankle rotation, foot arch, and prevent knee collapse, but I'm wondering if an excessive flare out of the toes causes too much access from hip flexors and such, and not requiring so much work from the quads. I understand that the wider you go, generally, the larger your foot flare out should be, but when you compare the same, let's say, shoulder width stance, when consciously forcing your feet pointing straight out in front of you versus allowing some flare out, do quads activate more? Again, not debating overall stance width here, and thanks.
Cool. So my really unintelligent, non-biomechanical knowledge answer would be, how do you feel? It would simply be, when you're changing your foot position, how does it feel? And if it allows you to get deeper, how does that feel versus kind of having a less splayed out feet position? How does that then feel? I think you can overthink it, and you can have much discussion around what that joint angle does and how that kind of impacts kind of muscle activation or kind of range of motion on different tissues. But I think at the end of the day, if you're getting the sensation of a better pump, better activation, better disruption within that muscle, that's indicating better stimulus towards it, I think you're pretty shoe in. I'd be surprised. I would argue against someone who had a biomechanical answer of, oh, it must be this, but the person's feeling exact opposite. And I'm like, I just find that really hard to believe that if someone's getting a better pump, better soreness, better disruption within a muscle, that isn't the way to go. Despite what it might say on paper. So I think literally your own feedback for me would probably be the best answer.
Same here. Absolutely. I think that in the past, I would have thought like you, Colin. I was always looking for like the way that I should squat. I was always looking for the answer on the internet. But no one could have told me other than myself and trying and experimenting how it feels to me. What feels most natural and also the strongest and the healthiest. I've tried so many things, and I think that also I was always susceptible for actually getting my hips fixed, right? Or getting kind of a hip replacement in the future. Thing is though, I really do believe that I accelerated it with bad squatting technique, and especially also squatting in a way that I thought I should squat in, or the way I should squat, because someone else was telling me that this is the only way I should squat. And especially when you're beginning, you see it all the time. And here, especially like a couple of years ago when Westside Barbell was still around, or kind of still around, still very much present on the internet, and also Starting Strength and all that kind of stuff. They're always talking about like a wider stance, feet outwards, and I tried it like month and month and month, and my hips got so freaking beaten up, right? And whenever I then, out of just like curiosity, tried a more narrow stance, feet forward, it felt always good to me. But because of my bias, what I read on the internet, and back at that time, I simply didn't have the critical thinking skills, right? I thought like, no, this is not how you are supposed to squat. So you should learn to actually squat like with your feet angled outwards and having a wider stance. So I continuously try to make it happen for me, and probably at some point going through this range of motion continuously, right, was probably also leading to me fucking up my hip like big time. And I think that right now, like after years of observational data with myself, but also with other people, I am more so at a point where I'm saying like, okay, how does that feel to you? Without me actually giving you a clear answer of this is how you should do things. Because I've seen so many different variations of like the way you pull, the way you press, the way you squat, that overall, if you were to ask all of these people and have like a case study or a poll, like, okay, why are you pulling that way? Most of the good pullers or lifters or whatever would tell you then, okay, this is where I'm feeling the most strongest or the most natural with this kind of stance, with this kind of pressing movement, especially with high level powerlifters or so, right? Who have come to that conclusion, like after trial and error, after 10 to 20 years or so of experience. You can probably believe that they have a better understanding of their body than any kind of biochemist, someone with biomechanics coming around saying like, no, because XYZ has to move in a particular way, and that's why you need to squat that way. Simply not how it is. And same goes for these kind of things, and especially on a leg press. I mean, what's the purpose behind a leg press? Hopefully to activate or get the most stimulus for our quads as possible, right? And if you then need to modify your stance and you feel it in a particular way that is kind of not really the way other people would do it, if you are then saying like, okay, this is the best I feel, and also I get the most reward from this exercise doing it that way without compromising something like load or so. I don't want you to, I don't know, doing a Bosa ball squat, something like that, then hey, fair enough. Just take a look at someone like Charlie Young, the way he's doing the leg presses. He is having a very, very narrow stance and feet outward very significantly, right? And just take a look at his squats. I know this is a poor argument of being like, okay, take a look at that guy, right? So we are not better than most of the bros. But I mean, when you're then taking a look at him, it's just like an example of it being a possibility of doing it that way and also getting the most out of it.
Cool. So where was it? Yeah, so you talked about Charlie Young. I was going to bring up like, like good example. You think about, I don't know if this is a good example, but it's kind of those notions you see online. So I must do it this way because someone says it. It's like Bryce Lewis is a high bar squatter as a powerlifter. That generally is not advisable. Low bar is typically the way to go, but he's stronger high bar. So he kind of breaks the mold.
Was a world champion or still is. I mean, take this, right? He's doing it in an unconventional way and still is a world champion.
Yeah.
And that is not his weakest lift. So, yeah, it's not that because most of the time when you're seeing like top level powerlifters, they always have like that super strong lift, especially like strong deadlifters. They don't have the greatest squat or bench, but because they can actually make it up with a proper deadlift, they move up the ladder, like going from being, I don't know, top 20 or so, up to perhaps even top 3 sometimes.
What was I going to say? Oh, I was going to say on the leg press as well. It's interesting because for me, if I tried to do like on that matrix, particularly on that matrix ones, if I try and have my feet low and narrow, like I can come down like nowhere because my hips just, I have no space with my hips. Yeah. So I'll go a bit higher, a bit wider, and now I can get big range of motion on my quads. And like on paper, like, oh no, your feet are high and wide. That's not quad, but I get greater range of motion on my quads. It feels way better. So I think like feeling out movements is just, I think people jump too far and they overcomplicate things often. I always talk about this with Greg Potter quite often in terms of sleep and trying to identify things and like using fitness trackers. And he's like, how'd you feel? I'm just like, yeah, I think I should have done this with my sleep because actually I felt better that way. It's like, yeah.
Also, one more thing, and that is, how much do you think that a slight modification will deviate or change things up in regards to the activation, right? So you're doing a leg press. You're doing it hopefully already in a proper manner. So simply due to that fact, your quads are activated. Maybe you're not feeling them as much as you can as of yet, but still they are doing a lot of work already. Right? It's the same when it comes to doing a squat. When you do a proper squat, sometimes you don't feel the quads yet. Can you improve it to make it purely being felt in the quads? Absolutely. But as long as you do a proper squat up and down, there's no way that your quads aren't active.
Cool. Next question.
So John Jones, amazing name. I wonder if that's his true name, John Jones. Sounds like just like a, I don't know, like what's it called on your ID cards in England? Like when it's just like an example, John Doe.
Oh, right. Yeah, it's like John Doe or like John Smith or...
Okay, yeah, in Germany it's Max Mustermann.
Okay.
So Musterhausen. And this is exactly like this. John Jones.
It's making me think of Jessica Jones. He's like a Marvel character. Maybe he's related.
Yeah. So I'm in a situation with my job where I need a certain degree of physical preparedness 4 consecutive days per week. Would I be best served bumping my frequency to reduce day after recovery needs, or working primarily around my 3-day weekend? Either seems viable, but I would like an outside opinion. Did you get that?
I
had a hard time understanding. So he's very active for 4 days out of the week, right? No. Go ahead. If you understood it.
I think I kind of did, but at the same time, I think probably we need more context to answer it more fully, even maybe what his job is. Because if, like you said, if he's active 4 days of the week, he needs to be prepared for those 4 days. Then even if he trained hard on the 3 days, he's probably carrying in a load of fatigue into those 4 days. But then can he train during those 4 days where he is fatigued or where he is being very physically active? Are they going to be productive sessions? To me, it reminds me of kind of sports people who are in their competitive season where they've got games like every weekend and maybe some training in the week. And it's like just their adaptive resources and their kind of resources for training is just so taken by their competitive sport at that period of time, and they need to be prepared for their games, that they can't afford all the kind of resources towards training, and maybe they need to lower their volume. So unfortunately, I imagine his job is not like seasonal. So I imagine he hasn't got the opportunity to just be like, yeah, I'll just maintain during the period of time when my job is like demanding me, and then other times. So in that case, I mean, maybe taking one rest. This is just me throwing an idea out there. Taking a rest day at least before your first day of work, and then training the last day of work and the 2 days after that. That kind of gives you the longest recovery time when you have to be on form for work, but also allows you to get 3 full body, I would assume full body sessions in, where maybe you do like a push-pull full body or something along those lines. But it's going to be challenging if you can't, again, without more context, I can't understand exactly how much you can dedicate towards it. But that's an idea that might be complete trash.
Let's move over to the next question. That is from Mo.
Probably wise.
Yeah, Mo Wolf. And this is something that I can already say, like, this is extremely outside of our scope of practice, but I'm just going to read it out anyway, just so that people know that this is nothing that we can answer. I just posted on the group, but would a daily allergy mat reduce gains by reducing swelling? I take loratadine for very mild allergies, but would hate to be losing out on gains because of it. I have no idea, to be honest.
Yeah, and it's one of those where it's like we've even spoken about NSAIDs before. It's like if it improves your quality of life significantly, I think it's kind of like one of those things you got to trade off. But again, yeah, it's not something I am going to admit to have any sort of knowledge on either.
Yeah. So, yeah. Moving quickly on to the next one, that is from Darko Stankovic. What do you think about assessing every body part and conclude if that muscle group is fast twitch or slow twitch dominant, and getting most of our or your volume with more individual rep ranges? Explanation: I've been listening to Barricade recently, and his conclusion was if you have 2 rep ranges, one is impressive than the other, you have more dominant fibers. For example, chest incline press, 100 kilograms 4 times 6. Or second way, 80 kilograms, 4 times 13 repetitions. Conclusion: more slow twitch dominant for this person. Majority of volume for chest should be in a higher rep range.
Right. So this is interesting. I think maybe the perpetrator. I don't even know what I'm saying. The person who came up with it first. I was trying to be smart and use a word that I don't even know. So the person who kind of came up with this idea of kind of testing muscle groups to identify whether they're more fast or slow twitch, I think was Menno Henselmans, where he would literally like take you through. I think that he may have even used like 1 rep maxes at some point, or like 3 rep maxes or something, to kind of identify, and kind of if your estimated 1 rep max was higher if you used like your 10 rep max or versus like your 5 rep max or something along those lines. I'm not exactly sure so I don't want to say exactly what he was using, but he was like testing muscle groups to see if they're fast or slow twitch. That's the first I heard of it. I wasn't completely convinced that was a good way to go about things. I think it's impractical for some muscle groups. And then I know Mike Israel has spoken about a few times where like you can bias repetition ranges towards like higher if it's a more slow twitch dominant, or lower if it's more fast twitch dominant. And then there's controversy just to the idea of whether or not you can identify muscle group fiber type, and whether or not high like repetitions are more slow twitch dominant, or like low repetition or more fast twitch dominant. I think there is some decent evidence, and I would probably side with the fact that if you're training heavier, then it's more fast twitch dominant kind of that's going to be used, and if you're training lighter, generally the slower twitch fibers will kick in, and it'll be more kind of slow twitch dominant. But at the end of the day, we don't have any kind of hard and fast rules about it. I do generally think that you should cycle between all repetition ranges at some point. I think you could try and bias towards certain repetition ranges, just whichever are giving you the best, again, similar to fatigue ratio, essentially, whichever ones are giving you the best disruption, pump, feel, which ones you're progressing really well with. I think you could bias towards it. I think some muscle groups are just, they're not going to be used below 10 repetitions in terms of like isolation lifts. It's just not going to happen. Whereas, yeah, like, I don't know where I'm going, but in a sense, I think there's some credibility towards that line of thought. I think it's been thought about for quite a long time. Practically, it doesn't change a whole lot of what I'm doing to programming, because I tend to take people through a wide span of rep ranges. And also, I would say most people are not skilled enough to be able to really identify it massively. But some muscle groups, it's a little clearer. Just generally, like hamstrings tend to be a bit more fast twitch. So you don't go above, like the highest I've gone with rep ranges on a straight leg deadlift would be 15 reps, or a hip hinge. 15 reps is by far the highest I would ever go, and definitely bias closer to like 8 to 12, maybe even lower than that potentially. So yeah, in a roundabout way, I think there's some credence to it. I don't think it would change too much practically because of just the constraints of exercise selection and practicality within the gym, and people's actual ability to be able to identify whether they're more fast or slow twitch.
I think you brought up a lot of good points. And in addition to that, I just want to add two things, because to me, it sounds like more of an acute idea. Thing is, though, acute in the sense of like, okay, this is what you can do now. Thing is, though, that we always need to take into consideration other scientific literature that basically kind of conflicts with that. And that is especially coming from Andy Galpin, who actually found more so the evidence that the fast and slow twitch muscle fibers, there's always a conversion happening, or rather there's possibly a change over time. And also from a neurological perspective, we are always then priming ourselves for the task at hand. And everyone can attest to that who has done something like, I don't know, hypertrophy training for a very long time. Something in the, let's just take the arbitrary repetition range of 8 to 15 repetitions and go just like try to test your 1 rep max now, right? You're not primed and you're not having the readiness for that because of neurological adaptations and also technical efficiency as well. So when you then, however, go and train that way with lower repetition range for a very long time, just do something like 8 to 15 repetitions. Probably what you've done in the past in regards to your performance will not be like what it is then at the time of you transitioning over. Also here, I think that there's the skill component to it that needs to be taken into consideration. And these are like long-term things that we need to take into consideration. And that is not applying to an example like this, because in an example like this, if someone is actually going through a test without taking into consideration what they've done before, it can always be screwed towards one or the other, right? And if you are then already making up your conclusion of, oh, yeah, then he's more so fast twitch dominant fiber or slow twitch dominant fiber, it is, I think, not the right way in actually coming up to a conclusion. And I know that Chris is a very, very smart guy and also a researcher himself. So coming up, so I don't know this. I have not heard of this, how he's doing things. So I'm missing, of course, a little bit of context of saying like, okay, this is the way he does things. Now I'm kind of perhaps straw manning what he is saying. But for me, it just sounds like a way of going about it in a short term or in a more acute sense, which doesn't really tell us much about the true muscle fiber conversion that is happening inside of you, or like the ratio of your muscle fibers. So I think that, once again, it's like Steve said, the idea is compelling, and many people have tried to come up with somewhat of a concept in order to actually get the most out of it in that department. But more and more evidence is coming out as well that muscle fibers they move on a spectrum, and then it doesn't even take into consideration other aspects such as technical efficiency, readiness from the nervous system as well. And thus, I simply don't think that it's a viable option to go by. And it doesn't really, also, like you said, it doesn't really change anything about the principles, because also here, it doesn't really take into account all the findings from Brett Schoenfeld's lab. When it comes to, for example, systemic fatigue coming from lower repetition ranges, yes, the muscle fibers are getting activated. So the entire range of muscle fibers are getting activated more quickly from rep 1 onwards. However, when your proximity to failure is actually appropriate for a specific repetition range, your muscle fibers are probably also then fully activated as well. And then it comes back to the question of like, okay, what is more systemically fatiguing? Doing 4 times 6 for 100 kilograms or doing 4 times 13 for 80 kilograms, right? And then the overall workload that you've been doing, and what is then the higher hypertrophic stimulus. So a lot of things that, in my opinion, are missing here and don't really lead to me changing anything at all. And I don't really think that it's kind of a viable option to base your programming off of.
Hey, Pascal here. I just quickly wanted to remind you of our online coaching service. At Revive Stronger, we put a huge emphasis on the personal aspect of our coaching. And if you want to take your physique and knowledge to the next level, hit the link in the description below.
I have actually, it's really interesting. And again, I would never like to speak like I'm just going off what like you said there, you're just going off what you've seen. You're not necessarily saying exactly this is what Chris says, but I've had a client who had a program, and I believe this is what happened, from Menno, and he didn't work with Menno. It was like a one-off program or something, I believe. And he did some tests to determine he was very fast twitch. Yet we went through some programming together, did some higher and so fast twitch, and so he was well adapted to low rep ranges. We included some high rep ranges, and he got absurd pumps and disruption. And I was like, I think we should probably use this. I don't think we should discount it. So yeah, I think your point to Andy Galpin's research as well is really interesting. And he came on the podcast, talked about it a little bit. And you even used the word primer, I think, because we talk about this a bit in the primer phase, where we do suggest that maybe doing some lower repetition ranges for a period of time can help transition fibers to more fast twitch. We definitely know this, that fast twitch muscle fibers have a higher propensity to hypertrophy, so that should potentiate and prime you for growth in future. Go buy the primer book, link below. I don't even know if it will be linked below.
It is,
but yeah,
it is.
It's to that.
Yeah, and even Cody Horn is actually coming out with more research in that field as well, with the resensitization effect. And if you then have a time of lower volume and perhaps also lower repetition ranges, perhaps you are then more primed in order to do the task at hand, because this is basically what the body is always doing, right? It gets more efficient at the things that you are doing over time. So if you are then doing an initial test, it could turn out that you are more so strong at the first example of doing 4 times 6. But that doesn't tell, at least to me, it doesn't tell me much about you overall, your potentials and the type you are, or et cetera, et cetera. This is exactly like, to me, it doesn't really sound different to something like the somatotypes. Like going off of one metric and then deciphering what type of lifter you are. I don't think that we are there yet. To be able to determine that yet. We don't have the technology of saying like, okay, this is the training for you, and this is the best thing that you can do because you're primarily XYZ muscle type.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything particular more to say. Maybe one thing. I think I remember, I quite like this, because I think it still makes a lot of just intuitive sense, is Greg Nuckols said, like the best rep range for you is the one within like, well, actually no, the best rep range for you is the one you can do and recover from the most. Was like, and that's essentially the best stimulus to fatigue ratio, right? Which is probably, I don't know, probably changes over time. And yeah, anyway.
Cool.
Just thought I'd say
then going to another one from Colin. It's a little bit longer, but we still have time. That's why I'm now going to cover this one. Going to ask another question, since I haven't seen a lot of others jumping on this thread. Yeah, that's true. Not much love this time around. What's going on, guys? So I want to make sure
their training days.
Yeah.
Instead.
I want to make sure that I have the nomenclature right about refeeds. I'm approaching week 8 of a cut, and I'm starting to get the feeling that I may need to draw out into a longer cutting phase. 212 down to 198 so far. But I'm aware that you will at one point hit a wall that you don't want to keep continuing to cut calories. I'm roughly 200 pounds guy that's currently in the 1800 calorie range, and I'm probably going to have to chop to, let's say, 1650 or 1600 kcals soon. I feel like that may be my limit. Would I then want to go to a prolonged maintenance and settle back in before going back into a deficit? And is that what you would refer to as a refeed? When do you refeed, and when do you go to a longer maintenance of, let's say, 4 to 6 weeks? Also, I vaguely recall you touching on the specifics in prior podcasts, so please don't hesitate to refer me to those before wasting a bunch of time responding. The waste of time already happened in regards to reading the question out loud. No, Colin, that is just a joke, of course. Thank you very much for that question. I think this is, of course, something that we've talked about already, but I think that this, because of the specific context that you've provided, does always help people in understanding the situation. And yeah. I think this can't be talked about enough because, yeah, sometimes not everyone is listening to all of the episodes and can recall that something has been brought up in the past.
Let me try it, because there was a lot covered there, actually. And he kind of gave his context and didn't ask any questions about it, but it was very interesting. So I do want to cover that.
Yeah, so let's kind of categorize or like chop it up into pieces and say like, okay, the first question is like, okay, is there a point that you don't want to exceed in regards to the caloric deficit? So for a guy like him, around 200 pounds, how low can you or do you want to go?
So I think you're constrained by definitely protein. So you want to get enough protein in. So a 200-pound guy in a calorie deficit, I imagine he's holding on to a fair bit of fat. So he'd probably be okay at 200 grams of protein, which is like times 4. So whatever that you come to. And then you obviously need to consume some fat. So like some fat in your diet. For a short period of time, you could probably go very low fat, but you're going to consume some fat. You obviously want to have micronutrients. Again, you could probably be devoid of micronutrients for a period of time. So then we're going to talk about like basically adherence. Can you even adhere to the diet? And then we're talking about like how long do you need to adhere to it? So then you get to like rapid fat loss zones and like basically what's the lowest calories you can realistically, and this was spoken to with Martin McDonald, where he talked about like diet on as low of calories as you possibly can with caveats in place of sufficient protein. It needs to be adherable for the period of time that you're going for. But in reality, as long as you're not extended, well, I mean, I just don't think you'd be able to realistically adhere to stupidly low calories for longer than numbers of weeks. So it's a challenging question to just answer. Like I said, there's some kind of prerequisites in that. We want to maintain muscle mass, so we have to maintain training performance, and we have to maintain protein intake. That's going to offer some limitations in terms of how low you can go with your calories anyway, and then what can you personally adhere to. And if you're going low on calories, you can't extend that for a long period of time if you're not getting sufficient micronutrients, sufficient like fats for fat soluble vitamins, hormones, and feeling good. So there's always going to be a barrier to that. At 200 pounds, like I tend to not like to go much lower than 10 calories per pound for most individuals. If I do go below that, it's maybe contest prep, maybe a short period of time. I'd be very interested to hear what his activity levels are like in terms of step count, training days. And I wonder, because I think a lot of people just get a bit carried away with things and they think they're not losing and they don't need to make an adjustment. It sounds like he's probably in a pretty hefty like deficit if he's already below 10 calories per pound. So I would probably wait it out. He also hasn't been dieting that long. It's been 8 weeks. If he'd been dieting 16 weeks, maybe I'd be concerned that, like, I don't know, you need a break because, like, metabolic adaptation, your adherence is probably falling through the floor, that sort of thing. And that is where, like, refeeds, diet breaks, maintenance periods would potentially come in. But I don't think at 8 weeks he needs to really change anything. And maybe you have a look at step count, activity levels, make sure he's weighing in each day or at least 4 times a week, taking weekly averages, because at baseline we have to assume he's doing a lot of things correctly, and there's small things that you can do maybe incorrectly or not to our methodologies, which make the puzzle really hard to identify whether or not what's really going on. So that can be tricky. I'll finish there. I don't know if I actually answered the question though.
Yeah,
I don't think there is a clear answer.
All of the things that you're saying there, and I don't need to repeat those. First, make sure to really nail all of the variables, right? Make sure that you're very much on point with macros, that you're tracking, all that kind of stuff, right? Assuming that you do that already. 1,600 or 1,800 calories for someone who's weighing 200 pounds is already quite low. So I need to assume that your activity levels outside of the gym on a daily basis are very low. This is something that is just like based on the experience with seeing 200-pound guys. I very rarely I see people being on 1,800 calories, being at your weight and not losing weight. Very rarely. So I have to assume that it's then need dependent. And yeah, take a look at this. If you're under 5,000 steps, of course, bump it up, right? Bump up the activity levels. And sometimes it's simply not possible. I know that some people have such a tight schedule throughout the day that any kind of additional activity is not feasible or possible for them. In that case, yeah, you can try something like maintenance phases. Perhaps this does help then in perhaps being a little bit more reactive during those busy times, because it could very much be that you've downregulated your activity levels even when you're sitting or even when you are super busy to an extent that is then just adding up over time. Take a short period of time at maintenance. It doesn't hurt, right? Do you have anything to lose? No. If anything, then you will either maintain and then you can just like continue from there with lower stress levels, lower diet fatigue. And if everything goes perhaps as you assume, maybe you are actually then accelerating the rate of weight loss afterwards, right? So you basically have nothing to lose when you are going to true maintenance. There's never any kind of downside to that, in my opinion, unless you are a competitor and you have a deadline or so. Other than that, I don't see that there's anything wrong in taking or going to maintenance at times in order to perhaps bring diet fatigue down, or to perhaps also see how you are in that kind of state, and also just to reset things a little bit. Other than that, I would then go to the next kind of question that he had, because we've talked about maintenance and whether this is also something that you can do. Also, refeeds. I wouldn't say that refeeds are appropriate at your point in time, because we know kind of it's still a little bit up for debate whether refeeds actually do something or not. I am more of a proponent of taking a prolonged time away from dieting instead of chucking in some like 1 or 2 days of higher caloric intake. Simply my gut feeling, and based on the evidence that I've seen so far, I don't think that 1 or 2 days will do anything except for psychological relief. This is just like my observational data and my understanding of the data right now. This can always change. I rather have it like we do things where it's like, okay, you have like a prolonged time of dieting and then you have a diet break, because we also know if you take those as a comparison, like 2 days of a refeed or saving up those days for like a complete week away from that, we know from the scientific evidence that being longer away from the deficit will probably have a higher likelihood of the reversal of those negative adaptations. So I don't think that in your position, a refeed is the best way to go about it. Other than that, the length of the maintenance phase, I would say like, okay, depends on your situation and how long you've been dieting for. you've been only dieting for 8 weeks, so I don't think an entire mesocycle of maintenance phase is the way to go. This is just my opinion. I like to do it like this, always at a deload, bring up the calories, right, when you are dieting. This gives you like 7 days, sometimes even a couple of days more outside of the deficit, which is then giving you a ratio of like 4-to-1 or so. And I think that this is absolutely sufficient. After 8 weeks, maybe take 2 weeks of a maintenance. Maybe 1 week is already sufficient enough for you to actually get rid of all that diet fatigue that has been built up over the past 2 weeks. But yeah, do you have anything else to add, Steve?
No, it's just, did he ask for definitions of like the difference between refeed to diet break?
Yeah, kind of.
I mean, even very short, just the length is the only difference. All of them bring your calories up to maintenance, typically through carbohydrates, but that's more emphasized the shorter time that you're taking because of the impacts carbohydrates and the benefits carbohydrates going to have more acutely, but over the long term, it's more calorically kind of dependent. So yeah, refeed tends to be 1 to 3 days. Diet break, maybe 3+ days, up to like 2 weeks, and then maintenance phase is probably like, it's a whole mesocycle tends to be, so I'd say like 2 weeks plus generally. And it's kind of which one you take and when you take them is kind of related to how long you've been dieting. So like the longer you've been dieting, probably the longer you'll need away from dieting to get rid of some adaptations. But I'm the same with Pascal, with refeeds. I don't tend to find them to be particularly beneficial unless it's, for my clients, more of the time a refeed is just used because there's a social occasion or there's like, they're away, there's a bachelor party or whatever it is. It's like, it's just unrealistic to diet that day. So why don't we call it a refeed? Because it is a program bringing up to maintenance. It's just putting pause on fat loss. And it's just going to be a nice psychological break. And whilst, yeah, I would agree, most of the research is probably indicating it's psychology more than anything that's being improved. Some people might love refeeds. It might do so much for them psychologically. So maybe they want to be using them. But yeah, I think in his context, probably taking a week or two, like you suggested, probably going to do a world of good. Might upregulate metabolism a little bit if he's one of those people that are kind of unfortunate in some ways that they respond really a lot to calories. But maybe his maintenance could be a lot higher than what it is because a bit of food in, NEAT starts rapidly going up. I would put a plug in. I did do a presentation on the members site, steps for fat loss. I go into a lot of detail about NEAT, NEPA, using steps, how to track them, metabolism as a whole. So if someone wants a fuller understanding of that, I think there probably a lot of members even listening. If they haven't watched it yet, I always like feedback on those. So it'd be cool to have some feedback too.
Absolutely. Cool. And that is it already. Time always flies by with you so quickly, Steve. I would love to be together with you. Because
in this bed.
No, like in a relationship. Because life would just be so lovely, but also over so quickly, which would be unfortunate, but it would be lovely because it's a good thing, right? When time just flies by with someone, you know it was a good time.
It's true.
It's true.
I'm awful at these like awkward like
saying
jokes.
That you love me.
I can't. No,
I know that you're having a hard time admitting that.
I love we all
iron.
know. That's we all know. And Dragon Ball Z. Which, if you had those tattoos on your body, where's the Dragon Ball Z in the dumbbell?
I always considered doing that, right? I always said like, okay, if I could redo my arms, so the right arm would always stay like this, but the left arm, this is the arm I started with. So with 18, I didn't really know what I wanted. So typical Dunning-Kruger effect. I thought I knew what I wanted, but I had no idea, right? So I would definitely get a sleeve from Dragon Ball. Well, not just Dragon Ball, but probably like anime. An anime sleeve.
Sorry, I can't even say it with a serious face. I just love to see you with an M on the forehead, just like a margin.
Oh God,
I bet like someone with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely not look like Vegeta, like the typical meme. What I think I do look like, and then in reality, it's just like, Oh dear.
Right.
Cool.
Cheers, guys.
Guys, thank you very much for listening as always. And you know the drill. When you've made it all the way to this point in time, hit the like button. And if you haven't yet subscribed, holy shit, hit the subscribe.
We haven't done our picking the commenter.
Oh shit. Then we need to do this right now. Very quickly.
I do have an idea for the commenting's been awesome actually. I'm surprised so many people are commenting. It's really nice.
Yeah, because they have an incentive now.
Yeah, true.
Greedy bastards. So
did Trevor ever actually get in touch?
Yeah, yesterday.
Oh, he did? Oh, amazing.
No, was it yesterday or here in the night? He reached out to me. Yeah, he did. Cool.
I have an idea for what they can do this week. Shall I announce that?
Say it and I'll bring up everything else here.
So we've done calories, we've done training frequency, and actually this is not related particularly to either of those, but this time I want to hear what your favorite brand of gym equipment is, and if there is a specific machine that you just adore.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good one because so this is still our dream to build at some point the gym, right? So, and then just like make all of the machines the best, or pick and choose like from the best machines. I think that this is what a Dust Gym wants to do, isn't it? Right? So let me bring up the screen for you guys. Screen 2. Yep. Screen share. Yep.
Paint all our equipment black
here we
and orange.
are, as always. Copy paste the last video, right? Here, copy paste, and then start raffle and pick a random winner. Come on. What's going on here? Always. I have to get the YouTube comments first and then start raffling. All right, and it's Angela Hudson, and she said, I used to do 4 times per week, but because of COVID, I switched to 6 times per week, just so I have something to do. Cardio is currently 1 to 2 hours of walking almost every day. It gives me time to listen to the podcast. And this is,
I like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And this sounds very similar to what many people, including myself, have done as well. Like, I always walk a couple of hours per day, but especially like bumping up my frequency to twice daily training ever since the lockdown, because I had the time for it. So yeah, thank you very much, Angela. Feel free to reach out to one of us in order to get your free membership for the website. And other than that, guys, this is it now. This is it. Please leave a comment in the comment section below about your favorite gym equipment and the favorite, what was it? Machine,
favorite brand, right? And then favorite machine.
Yeah. Cool. So guys, speak to you next week. Cheers.
So I'm Steve Hall, founder of Revive Stronger and a coach of Revive Stronger.
My name is Pascal Flor. I'm the co-owner of Revive Stronger and also a coach, of course.
Revive Stronger has probably been going solidly for 3 years, roughly about 3 years.
Revive Stronger, to me, it is becoming kind of my child, my foster child. It's the gathering and getting together of like-minded people.
We've been expanding the coaching team, which is helping us help more people, but each coach can only help a certain number of people.
Right now, it's all over the place. We have YouTube, we have Facebook, we have Instagram, but there isn't that community aspect behind that.
And so the next step for us is developing a membership site.
So basically, we want to create a family and a community that is then benefiting from another.
A really cool community for people within our little niche is going to be a website.
They will get early access to our podcast.
You can access us, ask us questions.
The community aspect, we have a forum there. You can ask questions, but also you can log your journey.
There's also going to be courses on there.
Courses, presentations on different topics. Discount of past seminar footage. We will log our journey as well. We'll start vlogging.
We're going to have documentaries.
Our entire athletic journey. Furthermore, they get access to an exercise video library.
The exercises that we love for hypertrophy and maximizing hypertrophy, we're going to go through those in depth, telling you how to execute them.
We kept them concise and also mobile friendly so that you can watch them in between your sets.
I'm super excited to grow this community. The amount of value that we're going to be delivering is huge, and I'd love you to be part of it.
You will get so much out of that.
I'll see you inside.